Many Ukrainians asked, "Why did you come? Everything is fine where you are." I replied, "No, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, Kharkiv regions. We were constantly shelled with incendiary munitions, and at the end, they even fired us on Sepyak. I said, all right, we'll fight here for half a year, then I'll go liberate Belarus." The enemy is learning. This is no longer the same adversary we faced at the beginning. At that time, Belarus chose peaceful protest. Later, everyone realized peaceful protest doesn't work. When I got a draft notice from the Belarusian army, I refused. I had never been a soldier and never imagined a military life. In the fight against the Russian occupier, Ukrainians are not alone. Great nations join us to resist Russia and reclaim their sovereignty. Today, we speak with a representative of the Belarusian Volunteer Corps. Thank you for agreeing to this interview and sharing your service. Thank you. Let us begin with this. How and when did you arrive in Ukraine? What details can you share? I arrived in Ukraine through Poland. We came in the evening. The atmosphere was extremely tense when I had just crossed the border. I expected more difficult moments at the crossing, and I felt that something serious was happening. It was frightening. It was difficult because I was traveling without knowing where I was going. But now I feel very comfortable in Ukraine. Ukraine welcomed me, and I feel truly at ease here. Why did you decide to come to Ukraine at that time? After all, the beginning of the full-scale invasion was a moment when Ukrainians were leaving the country, along with residents and citizens of other nations who had been living here. And yet you, like many other volunteers from different countries, came to Ukraine instead. All of this happened through the lens of the events that took place in Belarus in the year 2020. Some may not know, but Belarus experienced mass protests against the regime that attempted to falsify the elections. People took to the streets. There had always been repression in Belarus, but after the year 2020, it reached a new level. Many people were imprisoned. There were countless fines and widespread violence. For those active and passionate individuals who stood up, life became extremely difficult. I myself was caught in that repressive machinery. There were many hard moments. I understood that the state would continue to pressure me indefinitely, so I decided at some point to leave. I was prepared to go to Poland and had already begun looking for work there. But when the full-scale war began, I saw Belarusian media spaces, those Belarusians who had already been here for some time, who had been fighting from the very first moment, and I realized that these were the people with whom we could build the future of Belarus. Because, as everyone saw, Belarus had chosen peaceful protest. And later, everyone understood that it does not work. I have one more additional question. How do you find your interaction with Ukrainians? How do you feel living in Ukraine? People say Belarusians and Ukrainians are spiritually close. Despite Belarus's pro-Russian leadership, many Belarusians have come to Ukraine, some to live, others to join the defense forces. What is your experience? Indeed, we have much more in common with Ukrainians than with Russians. Despite the propaganda, despite the fact that Belarus underwent a kind of silent annexation, without resistance, simply through legislation and mass propaganda, I arrived here and saw completely different people. They reminded me of the passionate Belarusians who once took to the streets. These people understood what was happening. They knew who the enemy was. Everything was clearly laid out in their minds. It was very easy to connect with them, and when we spoke, we understood each other immediately. Who are your comrades in the Belarusian Volunteer Corps today, and what are their stories? I understand you cannot share many details for obvious security reasons, but in general, who are the people standing shoulder to shoulder with you? Yes, I will speak in more general terms because it would be inappropriate to name certain individuals. Some of their families are currently being held hostage by the Belarusian regime. Most of us are Belarusians, although there are also Ukrainians among us. Those who came here had previously lived civilian lives. For example, speaking about myself, when I received a draft notice from the Belarusian army, I refused. I had never been a soldier and never imagined that my life would be connected to the military. Some of the guys came directly from Belarus, others from Europe. Many had already been living in Poland, and some were already here in Ukraine. Most of them had ordinary civilian lives, families, decent jobs, businesses, and they decided that this was the place where they could gain experience, build connections, and meet the kind of people with whom real change in Belarus could be achieved. There is one topic that seems especially relevant now. For many Ukrainians, it is military training. How did yours take place? How long did it last? What can you share with us? As far as I can tell, our military training did not differ much from that of other units. There are, I believe, 3 fundamental components: physical conditioning, firearms training, and medical training. That is the foundation. There were many training sessions. I was fortunate, or perhaps not, but there were a great many of them. Later, I became genuinely interested in all of it. I had the opportunity to work with mortars and unmanned aerial vehicles. Warfare evolves rapidly, so it is essential to keep learning and improving constantly. Explosives, for example, there is a lot to master. I find all of it fascinating, so the training comes naturally to me. As for basic preparation, those core elements remain relevant even now. I'd like to hear about the Belarusian Volunteer Corps from the inside. What does your unit structure and daily operation look like? Only share what's safe. Yes, the structure is fairly standard. There is leadership, there are commanders, and there are field teams. We have medical evacuation groups, engineering teams, heavy weapons units, and unmanned aerial systems. We try to cover all operational areas so that we have specialists in every field and do not need to rely on other units for support. We aim to resolve all issues independently. Of course, when we operate, we also build relationships with other units, because cooperation is necessary one way or another. Sometimes we share experience and work side by side. Which directions have you served on? We've served in almost all major operational directions. I can mention Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Kharkiv. These are the key ones. Where were the fiercest battles? Which direction was the hottest? In my view, all of them were intense, but if we speak specifically about what was truly hot, then the summer of the year 2023 stands out. That summer was extremely intense. The fighting was difficult and relentless. What added to the heat was the constant shelling with incendiary munitions. Toward the end, they even fired a Sontsepyok. But everyone survived. It was extremely hot. And fortunately, everyone did survive. I would like to speak a bit about the common enemy of both Ukrainians and Belarusians. That is the Russian Federation. Based on your combat experience, how have the enemy's capabilities, skills, and resources changed over the course of the full-scale invasion? Everything is changing, it is evolving rapidly, and we must be prepared for that. The enemy is learning. This is no longer the same force we faced at the beginning. They are developing quickly, and they have support. If you look at the attacks on civilian populations, their capabilities are growing. More drones, more missiles. Of course, their resources are being depleted, but it is still unclear when exactly they will run out. And the way they treat their own people, they see them as a resource too. Their population is large, and they do not spare it. That is why we must always stay ahead and maintain the initiative. Only by doing so can we win, because they outnumber us. How would you assess the current situation in Belarus? I would say the situation in Belarus is not improving. As I mentioned, since the year 2020, the repressions that began have only intensified. Now, even those who have already served their prison terms are being detained again, simply because there is no one left to arrest. Let me remind you that Belarus still has the death penalty. The state uses it as a tool of moral pressure. Anyone who opposes the regime will face repression. Even those currently in leadership, those who, as we say, are covered, they too face repression if they speak out against the system. The regime spares no one. What does life look like for Belarusians today? If you are in contact with people who remain in Belarus, what do their daily lives look like? Because if you watch Lukashenko's propaganda, it resembles Russia. Everything is fine, the economy is growing, everyone is happy. It seems more like North Korea under Kim Jong-un than the Kremlin. But what does it look like from the inside? What do people share about living under such pressure? Of course, that polished image, the one where everything is fine, where propaganda videos show clean streets and high security, with uniformed officers walking around, that is all a facade. It has always been that way. When I first arrived, many Ukrainians asked me, "Why did you come here? Isn't everything fine there?" I said, "No, that is just a pretty picture. Because if you are not in context, if you do not see it with your own eyes, you may genuinely not understand." But things are not getting better. The economic indicators are very poor. Unemployment is widespread. Everything they show is, of course, a lie. I cannot speak in precise terms right now, because I am here, and my circle of communication with those still in Belarus is very limited. But I do know that with each passing year, things get worse and worse. Yes, recently there was news that some political prisoners were released, but that is a tiny fraction. The vast majority remain behind bars, and it is unclear when, or if, they will ever be released. How do Belarusians, the Belarusian people in general, view the Russian-Ukrainian war? For the most part, they understand what is happening. The majority of Belarusians comprehend the conflict, but there is one critical point. No one may speak openly about it. You cannot voice your opinion, because the authorities will come and demand an explanation. It is not only forbidden to express support for Ukraine. Even if you say nothing and simply transfer funds to the Ukrainian armed forces, you will be identified. Afterwards, you will face criminal charges and repression. Many of those who donated have now either fled the country or are imprisoned. I would also like to discuss the cultural closeness between Belarus and Russia. From Ukraine's example, we see that Russia tries to infiltrate every sphere, music, literature, art, and then uses it to build propaganda about saving Russian-speaking populations, as if they are one people of one culture. When you still lived in Belarus, what was the relationship with Russia like? To what extent did people love and respect Russia, consume Russian media, or travel there? And perhaps we could draw a parallel. Has this changed now? Has Belarus officially grown closer to Russia, or did the full-scale invasion alter the dynamic? What is your view? Belarus was usually maximally integrated with Russia. I do not know how they could be separated now. When I arrived in Ukraine, I immediately heard the Ukrainian language. That was a very important marker for me. In Belarus, 90% of daily communication is in Russian. Everything is in Russian. Although Belarusian is nominally a state language, instruction in schools is very weak, and you rarely encounter it in public life. Even those who know Belarusian often choose to speak Russian, because everything around them is Russian-speaking. Sometimes, when you start speaking Belarusian, no one understands you. It is a dire situation. All cultural content, music, literature, the arts, is tied to the Russian language. In school, we studied many Russian writers and poets, and far fewer Belarusian ones. In that respect, the situation is very poor. Today, Belarusians realize they must maintain some distance from Russia. But to sever ties overnight is impossible. It would take several generations for true separation to occur. Now we turn to the potential separation of Belarus from the Russian Federation. Some Belarusian opposition figures and even certain Eastern European analysts say that Belarusian volunteers can gain combat experience here against the Russian Federation and later return to liberate their country from both Lukashenko's dictatorship and Russian influence. Do you share that goal? Certainly, that is my goal. However, when I first arrived, I lived in a kind of rosy bubble. I understood nothing. I thought we would fight here for half a year, and then I would go back to liberate Belarus. In reality, everything is different. I now understand that until Russia undergoes a complete collapse, Belarus will never be free, because Belarus remains under Russia's protectorate. In relatively peaceful times, Belarus felt somewhat more autonomous, since its authorities tried to balance relations not only with Russia, but also with Europe. But now everything has changed. They have only one ally, Russia. To speak of liberating Belarus now is an illusion held by certain politicians. Perhaps they understand this, perhaps they do not. But the fact remains, there are substantial Russian forces stationed in Belarus training Belarusian security services, making any immediate liberation impossible. I believe that only after Russia's collapse can one truly speak of freeing Belarus. It is not a matter of driving in on tanks and ringing the bell. That will not happen. To conclude, when you think of your country and of a possible, not immediate but eventual return home, how would you like to see your country in the future, especially considering your experience as a participant in the Russian-Ukrainian war?
Якою б ви хотіли бачити свою країну у майбутньому, зважаючи, зокрема, і на ваш досвід учасника російсько-української війни?
I would like my country to be more nationally oriented, to honor those who gave their lives so that Belarus could develop. That is very important. Fundamental elements such as culture, history, and language, all of that must be Belarusian. I do not even know how that should take place because it is a very complex question. Of course, I would like Belarus to be a country where every person has the right to live freely, where no one can come to you, search your phone, and say, "That is it, you are going to prison," where you are not fined simply for saying something they did not like, a country where people feel calm and confident, where people can grow in their chosen fields. That is the kind of country in which one would want to live. In Ukraine, the phrase is "glory to Ukraine." The response is "glory to the heroes." In Belarus, the phrase is "long live Belarus." And the response is "may it live forever." Thank you for taking the time to join us and share these important details. Thank you for your work toward the future of our country. Thank you. Thank you to our viewers for staying with us. Remember two things: support the Ukrainian Defense Forces, and know we are not alone in this fight against Russian aggression. Thank you.
Як бачите, у цій боротьбі проти російської агресії ми з вами точно не самі. Дякую.